Inside a classroom, a man stood in front of a schoolgirl adjusting a camera mounted on a stand. He reassured her that it was only a preliminary interview before the official shoot and encouraged her to relax and not feel nervous. However, when he turned back to the camera, he grew visibly flustered, muttering under his breath as he struggled with a button that refused to work. The girl calmly told him to take his time. She flipped through the pages of a book on the desk, her expression unreadable and completely detached. Noticing her blank demeanor, the cameraman let out an awkward laugh and scratched the back of his neck, admitting that he might be the nervous one instead. He explained that this was his first documentary as a main director. Still, the girl remained silent, her eyes never leaving the book. As the silence thickened, the man quickly pulled out his phone and attempted to call the other student scheduled to attend. After several unanswered rings, he could only hope the call would be picked up. Elsewhere, a phone vibrated on a nearby table displaying the director's name on the screen. The owner of the phone, however, was too absorbed in painting to notice. Completely focused on the canvas in front of him, he ignored the call entirely. Moments later, another person rushed into the room, stopping just inside the doorway to catch his breath. One hand braced on his knee. Despite the sudden entrance, the painter did not react. Growing impatient, the newcomer shouted the painter's name, calling out to Wong Choi. Even then, Choi showed no response, his attention fixed solely on the artwork before him. Back in the classroom, the girl finally closed her book and stood up, stating that she would be leaving since it didn't seem like any filming would happen that day. The cameraman hurriedly asked her to wait, still trying to reach the missing student, music, but she ignored him. She slipped the book into her bag, zipped it shut, and headed for the door. Lowering his phone, the man called out her name, Yonu, informing her that Wong had said he was on his way. Even so, she continued toward the exit. At that moment, the classroom door opened from the outside. Wong Choi stepped in with a pencil clenched between his lips, stopping just inches away from her. Yensu froze, surprise flashing briefly across her face before she frowned sharply and looked up at him. Wong met her gaze cautiously, neither of them saying a word. A few minutes later, both Wong and Yensu were seated across from the director, who now wore a sheepish smile. He expressed his relief that the documentary's main subjects were finally together, and attempted to lighten the mood by asking them to complete a statement about first impressions and lasting relationships. His question was met with silence as in music both students stared at him blankly, as though none of his words were registering. Sensing the discomfort, the man laughed nervously and introduced himself properly as director Dongil Park. He explained that he would be filming their documentary for the next month starting the music following day. He added somewhat awkwardly that being called director made him feel embarrassed and suggested they simply refer to him as Mr. instead. When neither student reacted, the director's smile slowly faded. Realizing he was being ignored, he abandoned his attempts at small talk and slid printed documents across the table. He explained that the documentary aimed to explore the everyday lives of Korean high school students from different backgrounds, focusing on their worries, routines, and personal realities as they navigated adolescence. In simple terms, the documentary involved observing their school lives for a month. They were told to go about their days as usual and behave naturally. The director repeated that this was only a pre-in, that there was no need to feel nervous, though it was clear he was the most uncomfortable music person in the room. Once the camera was set, he suggested they begin with brief self-introductions and asked Wong to start. Wong introduced himself as Wong Choi and stopped there, offering nothing more. The director let out a nervous laugh and commented that it was understandable since it was supposedly Wong's first time in front of a camera, though the lack of effort was painfully music obvious. The director then turned to Yonu. She introduced herself as Yonug, 19 years old, and explained that although she was nervous because it was her first documentary, she would do her best. The director's reaction was immediate. He jumped to his feet, visibly delighted. It was, in his eyes, perfect, almost too perfect. Noticing this, Wong pointed out that he hadn't received the same reaction. The director quickly approached him, patting his shoulders and insisting he hadn't meant to show favoritism, adding that Wong was charming as well. When Wong asked if he truly meant it, the director reassured him with a smile before returning to the camera and announcing they would proceed to the next question. The director then asked why they had agreed to participate in the documentary despite being busy with school during their final year. Wong raised his hand first and asked if he could answer honestly. After being given permission, he admitted that he had agreed because his parents had asked him to. Seeing the director's expression change, he quickly laughed and clarified that it didn't mean he was unwilling to participate, adding that he wouldn't run away. The director thanked him for the reassurance before turning to Yeonu. Yeonu explained that she found the concept of the documentary interesting music and believed the experience would be valuable to add to her resume. She emphasized that joining had been entirely her own decision. Wong glanced at her sideways while the director observed them closely, sensing a faint tension between the two. Clearing his throat, the director moved on, asking them to talk about their interests, what they liked, their hobbies, and even their dislikes. Wong went first, saying he enjoyed drawing and sleeping, and couldn't think of anything he disliked. Yeonu followed, explaining that she liked reading and had a strong interest in history, including that of other countries. As she continued mentioning her recent interest in environmental issues and predicting climate change as a major global concern in the next decade, Wong's expression gradually dulled. By then, he was visibly struggling to stay alert. As Yeonu moved on to her dislikes, she mentioned having many, one of which included people who slept excessively yet still yawned throughout the day. Her gaze briefly shifted toward Wong. Realizing she was referring to him, Wong covered his mouth, eyes widening. Yensu added that such behavior felt like a waste of life, something she found deeply unappealing. Wong blinked repeatedly, stunned, music, as if he had been slapped without warning. Sensing the growing tension, the director smiled anxiously and suggested changing the topic. He asked about their dreams. Wong said he simply wanted to eat good food and live comfortably, while Yeonu responded that life without goals was meaningless to her, and that her dream was to achieve each of her goals one by one. When asked about favorite movie genres, Wong chose sci-fi and monster films, while Yeonu expressed her dislike for unrealistic movies. Asked to choose between Jangyang and Zhong, Wong selected sweet and sour pork instead, while Yeonu chose Zhong. After hearing their responses, the director paused the recording and gently pointed out that they didn't need to intentionally oppose each other just because they were filming. Both immediately insisted that they were being completely natural. The director laughed, noting it was the first time they had agreed on something. He then asked about their first impressions of each other. Yensu raised her hand at once, asking if she could be fully honest. As she prepared to speak, her mind briefly replayed Wong barging into the classroom late, rushing past her, and tripping over himself. Before she could say anything, Wong jumped up, loudly, protesting that such questions were usually asked separately on television. Yeonu remained seated, her expression tight and displeased, finding his constant outbursts unsightly. The director diffused the situation by saying the pre-in had gone well enough, and asked if they had any questions. Yeonu immediately inquired about their deposit. The director assured her the money would be transferred music the next day with full payment after filming concluded. She noted this down and asked to be informed once the final date was decided, music, which he agreed to. As they prepared to leave, the director suggested getting food together to celebrate their first meeting. While standing, Wong hesitated before apologizing to Yeonu for being late earlier. She didn't respond, focused on her phone, and said she needed to leave. The director stopped her briefly, suggesting they take a commemorative photo. They stood close together as the camera was set. At the director's countdown, they glanced at each other, and when the shutter clicked, both wore stiff, awkward smiles. And with that, the documentary officially moved into a month-long glimpse into the lives of the first-place and last-place students. Back at the office, Director Dong Illinois was carefully pinning the photo of Wong and Yang Soo onto the wall music when he paused to admire it, clearly pleased with how it turned out. While he was still staring at the picture, two colleagues approached him. One commented that his documentary idea sounded impressive, while the other asked whether filming with students had been difficult. Dongle laughed lightly and replied that it hadn't been hard at all, describing both students as great kids. He even remarked that he felt lucky to always work with such good people, chuckling as he said it. But the very next day proved otherwise. Chaos broke out almost immediately. Yensu raised her voice, angrily, pointing out that what was happening had never been discussed. She demanded to know why she was suddenly expected to sit next to Wong Music in class for the entire month of filming, gesturing sharply in his direction. Meanwhile, Wong appeared completely spaced out, Music barely reacting. The director tried to laugh it off, nervously scratching the back of his neck and reminding her that she had been fine sitting beside Wong during the interview the day before. Yeonu cut him off at once, insisting that this situation was different Music, and demanding to see the contract immediately. Sweat began to bead on the director's face. After a moment, he clasped his hands together and apologized Music quietly. While this unfolded, Wong casually dropped into a chair, pulled out his sketchbook, and began drawing with full concentration. Music that focus didn't last long. Someone slammed past him, knocking into him hard. He turned sharply to see Yeonu sitting down with obvious irritation, offering no apology. Wong shouted at her without thinking. She turned slowly, her eyes darkening Music, as she asked what his problem was. The shift in her expression was enough to make Wong shrink back instantly, muttering that it was nothing. Later that day, Wong told his friend that the look Yeon-soo had given him felt like a warning, that if he crossed the line, she would end him. He insisted it had been terrifying. His friend listened calmly, sipping his drink, and remarked to Music that Yeonu didn't seem like the violent type, finding the situation unexpected. Wong leaned against the window, Music wishing he had never agreed to participate in the documentary, and wondering how he was supposed to survive an entire month beside her. His friend advised him to try getting along with her, pointing out that things likely went wrong from the start because Wong had been late. Wong replied that he had tried to apologize, but she hadn't accepted it. Just then, the bell rang. Realizing something, Wong suddenly asked if the documentary would also force him to eat lunch with her. As they headed toward the cafeteria, he continued grumbling under his breath. As expected, two lunch trays were placed down, one in front of Wong and the other in front of Yeonu. They ate in silence. Wong felt sick with tension, but remembered his friend's advice. Clearing his throat, he called out to Yeonu Music and suggested that they had started off badly. Since they would be stuck together for the next month, he thought they should at least try to get along. Yeonu responded with a cold stare, then calmly put in her earphones and continued eating. Taking that as his cue, Wong laughed awkwardly, stood up, and declared he would go find Director Park, convincing himself he had tried his music best. As he lifted his tray, he lost his balance. The tray struck a cup of water, sending it spilling across Yeonu's side of the table. He immediately apologized. Yeonu stopped eating and slowly looked down at the water. Minutes later, Wong lay sprawled on the floor, gasping dramatically while his friend stood over him. Wong weakly declared that if he was found dead within the month, Yensu was responsible. His friend told him to get up and wipe the ketchup stain off his shirt. Sitting up reluctantly, Wong accepted a napkin and asked whether Yeonu Music had some kind of issue socializing. His friend replied bluntly that Wong wasn't exactly qualified to judge anyone else's social skills. While wiping his shirt, Wong argued that if someone made a mistake and apologized, the apology should be accepted. Holding up his stained shirt, he complained loudly that revenge hadn't been necessary. That was when they both noticed the damage he had done by rubbing the stain. Wong yelled in horror, demanding to know what happened to his shirt. His friend snapped back that stains had to be dabbed, not rubbed, and promptly took over cleaning it himself. Elsewhere, Director Park stood alone with a canned drink in hand, music exhaustion clearly written across his face. Doubt crept in as he wondered whether the documentary would truly work out. He took a slow sip and released a weary sigh. Already feeling drained. Just as he glanced toward his camera, he suddenly froze. A small note had been taped neatly on top of it. It urged him to take good care of their dear Wong. He peeled it off, reread the words, and frowned slightly, unable to guess who could have left it behind. Back in class, the teacher arrived and instructed everyone to settle down and open their books. His attention soon shifted to the back of the room, where he questioned why a student was wearing gym clothes. Wong quickly explained that his uniform had been ruined during filming. The teacher's patience snapped at once, scolding him for using filming as an excuse and reminding him that gym clothes were not allowed in his class. After a tense pause, he relented, saying that he would let it happen this time, but warned that it would not happen again. Wong expressed his gratitude, then shot a brief glare toward Yeonu, who pretended she had nothing to do with the stained shirt. Letting out a quiet sigh, Wong turned away and began sketching in his notebook as the lesson continued. When school ended, the director cheerfully praised their work and suggested grabbing something to eat to celebrate their first proper shoot. Receiving no response, he opened his eyes only to realize both seats were already empty. As Yeonu walked down the hallway, music whispers followed her. Students murmured about her being filmed, mocking how she had the highest grades in school, yet still wanted to appear on television. To them, she seemed greedy. Yeonu paid no attention and continued home without slowing her pace. Upon arriving, she announced herself at the gate and called out for her grandmother. When no answer came, worry crept in and she searched the house, music eventually opening a door to find her grandmother inside. Her grandmother questioned the fuss, but Yensu immediately noticed something hidden behind her back. After a brief hesitation, her grandmother claimed she had only helped out a little. Yensu scolded her, reminding her of the promised break and the documentary pay. Their argument quickly escalated before softening into familiar banter, ending with Yensu hugging her grandmother tightly, smiling despite the protests. The following day at Wong's family diner, the table overflowed with food. His mother warmly fussed over the director, apologizing for not preparing more and joking about how difficult her son must be. The director reassured her, praising Wong and insisting filming had been easy thanks to him. Just then, Wong walked in with a pen between his lips and his bag slung over his shoulder, bluntly remarking that he had never wanted to be part of the documentary in the first place. The director asked what Wong meant, but Wong only raised his voice further, insisting that he did not want to be part of the documentary. His father came out at that moment, confusion written across his face, and questioned why he would say such a thing, adding that not many students were given the chance to work closely with the school's top-scoring student. Wong glanced at his father wearily and reminded him that he had once said studying was not mandatory for him. His father responded with an easy smile, explaining that he had not meant it that way. What he truly wanted was for Wong to make a new friend through the filming, someone besides Ji Wong. Wong turned away with a groan, muttering that befriending Yeonu was impossible. His father held onto him lightly and told him that was precisely why he needed to try harder. Wong smirked and suggested that his father befriend her instead, earning a light tap on the back and a playful insult. Before it could end there, his mother shouted from the kitchen, waving a large spoon and demanding to know why he would strike her precious son with such giant hands. Both father and son froze, staring at her before his father protested loudly that it had barely been a tap. Wong quickly backed him up, insisting it had not hurt. The tension spiraled into bickering, his father launching into a boastful rant about how people once lined up just to hold his hands while his mother snapped back, telling him to go live with those admirers instead. A loud crash followed somewhere in the kitchen, music leaving Wong staring blankly. As the argument continued, Wong let out a tired sigh and finally said that it was fine and that he would do the documentary. Both of his parents turned to him at once, their expressions brightening as they eagerly sought confirmation. Ji Wong, who had entered earlier, merely coughed and patted Wong's shoulder. Wong knew there was no taking it back now. At Jeonsu's house, her grandmother called her to breakfast, the table already neatly set. As they ate, her grandmother hesitated, muttering that there should be more side dishes and starting to stand. Yeonsu stopped her, calmly, saying the kimchi stew alone was enough. Music, scooping up another spoonful, her grandmother could only stare at her before her eyes grew moist. She scolded Yeonsu softly, Music saying she should not accept food so easily from others, and should learn to be a little picky so she would not be overlooked. Yeonsu paused mid-bite, clearly surprised, and asked what had upset her that morning, wondering if it was because of the scolding the day before. Her grandmother turned away, claiming she had lost her appetite, and walked out. Yeonu called after her, warning her not to sneak off to work, Music threatening to get angry if she did. From outside, her grandmother glanced back quietly. Yeonsu's intuition was as sharp as ever. On the way to school, the director suddenly slowed his steps, Music, and spoke to Wong with unusual seriousness, explaining that he had met many kinds of people and trusted his judgment. Even if Yeonsu appeared cold and Music intimidating, he believed she was not a bad person. Before he could say more, Wong sighed and brushed it off, saying he already had a plan for the day. The director stared at him in disbelief, and Jeong did the same, both wondering when exactly Wong had become someone with a plan. In class, Wong lay sprawled over a stack of books, fast asleep, drool pulling at the corner of his mouth. Ji Wong watched him with a blank expression, wondering if sleeping through the third period was truly part of that plan, though it suited Wong well enough. His gaze drifted to Yeonsu, who sat upright, eyes fixed forward before briefly glancing sideways with a sharp, unreadable look. Wong remained lost in his own world. In that world, 4 men, including Wong, sat together on a yacht near traditional pavilion-like structures, enjoying the calm surroundings. One of them expressed how fulfilling it felt to be with friends while appreciating art, then turned to Wong and mentioned hearing about an impressive landscape drawing he had made. Wong responded modestly, laughing under his breath and handing over the sketch, dismissing it as nothing more than casual doodling. The others stared at the paper in stunned Music silence, one of them remarking that it looked like a collaboration between Monet and Van Gogh. The man seated in the middle declared that he had never seen such a masterpiece before, while another remarked that Wong's talent was being wasted where he was Music, and suggested that he should move to Hanang City instead. Wong accepted the praise with a proud smile, calmly stating that he was satisfied living an idle life. The peaceful scene shattered when a loud crash echoed across the ship. A figure suddenly appeared, standing tall with a sword in hand, announcing that the high treason criminal, Wong, was to be restrained. As ropes were tied around him, Wong broke into tears, desperately pleading with Commander Yeonu to hear him out, insisting the accusation was unfair. He argued that he had spent his entire life being lazy and questioned how someone like him could possibly commit Music treason, claiming he had been framed. Commander Yeonsu raised her sword without hesitation, and declared that living lazily for one's entire life was in fact the crime. The blade came down and Wong jolted awake with a sharp gasp. His eyes widened as he froze, staring at a pencil being sharpened beside him. When Yeonu finished, she blew lightly on the sharpened tip before turning her gaze toward him. Wong shuddered uncontrollably, a chill running down his spine. She was terrifying. Later that day, as Wong and Ji Wong ran laps around the field, Wong complained breathlessly that he had worked extremely hard to get along with Yeonu, asking if Ji Wong had noticed his effort. Ji Wong Music replied casually that he had only noticed how hard Wong had napped. Wong groaned, Music saying she had even invaded his dreams, while Ji Wong suggested it was because he slept too much Music, and advised him to draw instead. Wong wiped sweat from his face, panting as he questioned how he was supposed to draw when Yang Su sat so close, surrounded by such an intimidating aura. His legs finally gave out, and he collapsed onto the ground, clinging to Jeong and begging him to stop running because he felt like he might faint. After some time, they ended up resting in an open area. Wong lay flat on his back, muttering that it was unbearably hot. Jeong sat nearby, calmly sipping his drink, and suggested that Wong try improving his grades since he was seated next to the top student in school. When Wong did not respond, Ji Wong sighed and asked whether he was not tired of deliberately answering questions wrong. Wong replied that his parents' only wish was for him to stay healthy, and that he was simply fulfilling that request. Jeong doubted they had ever imagined that wish translating music into last place. Wong suddenly sprang up, arguing that if he improved his grades music during the documentary, Yang Su's ego would only grow larger. Jeong glanced at him, asking if he was not overthinking things. Leaning against Jeong's shoulder, Wong insisted that Jeong could say that only because he had not experienced Yeonu firsthand. He added that appearances were deceiving. On the outside, she looked innocent like a bunny, but once she opened her mouth, she was as vicious as a shark. Ji Wong did not respond, simply taking another sip of his drink while quietly reflecting on Wong's music comparison. Later that day, the director stood by his camera, adjusting it repeatedly, clearly dissatisfied. He had barely captured any usable footage. Yeonu sat quietly with her book, fully focused on studying, while Wong had already fallen asleep beside her. A female student suddenly approached and asked if she could make a suggestion. Slightly startled, the director gave his approval, and she leaned in to whisper her idea. His expression brightened almost instantly. After dismissing the student, he asked Wong and Yeonu to step outside and then revealed his plan. They both stared at him in disbelief, questioning whether he truly wanted them to play badminton. The director responded with an easy smile, explaining that everyone had been studying hard and deserved a break, adding that he had already received permission from their teacher. Yeonu remarked that she doubted their classmates would appreciate it, but before she could finish, the announcement had already spread. The classroom erupted in cheers, the students buzzing with excitement. Turning back to them, the director added that anyone who did not feel like playing could simply take a nap. Wong yawned immediately and announced that he would be doing just that, while Yensu raised her hand, and music calmly stated that she was fine with participating. Out on the field, the students played energetically. Ji Wong, standing beside the director, asked whether the footage was good enough. The director replied that it was a fair question, admitting that he was beginning to think the decision might have been a mistake. Before long, Wong, who had not been allowed to nap, and Yeonu found themselves facing each other, rackets in hand. The match began, and after a short while, Wong complained loudly, asking how long they were expected to continue. When the director answered that it had only been 5 minutes, Wong pinched the bridge of his nose, swung his racket lazily, and muttered that he was unbearably sleepy. The shuttlecock flew off course and struck John Su on the head before dropping to the ground. The director and Jeong froze in shock. Wong hurriedly apologized, but Yeonu had already raised her racket and struck back without hesitation. Wong collapsed instantly. Looking down at him, Yeonu stated calmly that her hand had slipped and offered a brief apology before turning away and walking off. Wong scrambled to his feet and tried to chase after her, but the director and Jeong restrained him as he struggled helplessly. That evening, as Yeonu dried her hair at home, her grandmother watched her quietly before commenting that she seemed to have enjoyed filming, noting that she had been humming. Jeonu denied it outright. Her grandmother then suggested that she try befriending the boy she was filming with, saying it would be good for her to have at least one friend. Yeonu stepped closer, wrapped her arms around her grandmother, and kissed her cheek, insisting that she already had friends and that her best one was right there. Her grandmother asked why she was suddenly being so clingy. Turning away, Yeonu replied that her grandmother was all she needed and that she did not require anyone else. Her grandmother could only sigh as she watched her walk off. At Wong's house, he sat motionless at his desk while his parents peeked through the doorway. His father whispered that an hour had already passed, while his mother replied excitedly that she could not believe was finally seeing Wong sit at his desk, declaring that joining the documentary had been a brilliant idea. Wong remained still, his focus wavering, jaw tightening as he stared at the words written on the page before him. How to beat Yeonuk. Wong began to reflect on his childhood, retracing the path that had led him to this point. His name was Wong Choi, and he had been born into a family that owned several restaurants. He had always known how fortunate he was, and because of that, he had lived his life yielding easily, letting others win without resistance. Greed had never been part of him. The only thing he had ever truly wanted was to draw freely, spending his days sketching under the shade of a tree, unbothered and at peace. That peaceful life, however, had been disrupted the moment Jonu entered it. As the thought crossed his mind, he grabbed his head tightly, his brows knitting together. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that she had been a source of trouble from the very beginning. His mind drifted back 2 years earlier to the midsummer high school entrance ceremony of 2009. He remembered standing among the crowd as the principal handed Yeonu her certificate for entering high school as the top student. The hall had filled with applause and Wong had clapped along with the others until his hands slowly stopped. His gaze had remained fixed on her, his expression vacant, as if he had drifted into another world. As Yeonu stared down at the certificate in her hands, whispers had spread among the students. Some had muttered that her uniform looked more like her father's suit, while others had laughed that she seemed eager to announce to the world that she was the stereotypical smart student. When she stepped down from the stage and walked past them, the laughter continued. Yet the moment she turned to look at them, those same students had immediately looked away, pretending nothing had happened. Wong, however, had not looked away. His eyes had stayed on her, unfocused and dazed. When she noticed she had frowned and called out to him, startling him so badly that he had nearly jumped out of his skin. With her brows drawn together, she had demanded to know what he was staring at. Thinking back on it now, Wong felt that he should have understood what kind of person she was even then. But knowing it now changed nothing. He was already stuck. Clenching his jaw, he picked up his book and began to write with determination, his pen pressing firmly into the paper. He reminded himself that he was the kind of person who followed through on what he said he would do. Almost immediately, he crossed out what he had written. Studying, he realized, was not her weakness. But students who devoted all their energy to exams often lacked practical everyday common sense. That, he decided, would be his angle. A small, self-satisfied smirk tugged at his lips as he leaned back slightly. In his mind, the plan was flawless. He felt like a genius. The following day at school, Wong peeked through the classroom door, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Yeonu. She was his target. As he stepped inside, he caught the tail end of a conversation between her and the director. The director was enthusiastically telling her that he had followed her advice from last time, and that it had worked perfectly. Yensu responded with a faint smirk, remarking that such a level of common sense should have been obvious. The director laughed sheepishly, praising her and saying that he would leave everything to her, adding that she was simply amazing. Only then did the two of them notice Wong's presence. Wong stood there silently, staring at them with the same unfocused, dazed expression. Later, back at home, he immediately crossed out another line in his notebook. Common sense, he admitted, was not her weakness, either. After thinking long and hard, he convinced himself that there was no way she could possibly have an appreciation for literature. That belief, however, didn't even last a full day. The very next day at school, Yeonu stood in front of the camera reciting a poem. Her delivery was steady, her emotions perfectly controlled and precise. As Wong watched, sweat began to form along his temples. She calmly explained that it was her favorite poem. The director reacted strongly, praising her performance and admitting that it had been so moving he had nearly cried. He went on to compliment her for memorizing poetry so effortlessly. Wong could only stare, his eyes wider and more unfocused than they had been the day before as another carefully constructed assumption music collapsed right in front of him. Back at home, Wong quickly crossed out his previous conclusion. Literature, he admitted, was definitely not her weakness either. After sitting in silence for a while, his expression slowly shifted, and a deep grin spread across his face as he scribbled something new into his notebook, reasoning that perhaps she had no interest in music. That assumption barely survived a day. The very next day, Yonu stood calmly in class, playing Vivaldi's Four Seasons on the recorder with practiced ease. Wong returned home and crossed it out again, his pen dragging music harshly across the page. He immediately wrote down another supposed weakness, only to watch it collapse the following day when Yensu was seen interacting fluently with a woman in another language. As Wong stared in disbelief, he wondered how she even knew how to speak Indonesian. Back at home, he crossed that out as well, his movements growing sharper. He brought out yet another weakness. But the next day at school, she shattered that, too. This time, she was dancing. At that point, Wong could only stare, utterly stunned. It felt as though she had to be doing this on purpose. Eventually, back at home once more, Wong finally ruled it out entirely. Yensu had no weaknesses. The realization made him fume, his grip tightening around his pen. There was no way a person could exist without a single flaw. Scribbling something else into his book, he acknowledged that it might be unfair, but by now it couldn't be helped. The following day at school, Ji Wong and the director stood close together, both unconsciously leaning back with wary expressions. The director asked Wong if he was certain about what they were about to do, admitting that while it would make music a great footage, he didn't want Wong to go overboard just because they were filming. Wong, already bouncing slightly on his feet, insisted that he wasn't overdoing anything and laughed confidently. Yonu, meanwhile, calmly stretched her arms as if nothing concerned her. Wong announced that exercising was his hobby and suggested that they begin immediately. The director blinked in surprise since Wong was usually known for sleeping through everything. Other students gradually gathered around curious. Wong stepped forward and began stretching exaggeratedly, stealing a glance at Yonu, who was also stretching with a straight, unreadable face. The director then called out for them to start, explaining that he would count from 1 to 3, and that whoever reached the top first would win. When the count reached 3, both of them climbed, but Yonu moved faster. In a sudden motion, she kicked music Wong hard on the cheek, sending him crashing down to the ground before he could react. Later, as Wong splashed water music onto his face in the bathroom, Jeong told him flatly that he should give up. He simply couldn't win against Yonu. Wong turned toward him with tears gathering in his eyes and demanded to know how he could say something like that to music, his friend. He insisted that Ji Wong should be cheering him on and tilted his head slightly to show the bruise on his face. He was genuinely hurt. As he sniffled, Wong's expression slowly shifted as he began to think deeply. The more he reflected, the more something stood out. Jonu was always alone music in the classroom, during lunch, even on her way home. The realization hit him all at once, and he suddenly burst into hysterical laughter. At last, he had found her weakness. Of course, she had no friends. With such a horrid personality, who would ever want to befriend her? Still laughing under his breath, he left the bathroom and headed toward the classroom. Peeking through the doorway, he saw a student handing Yensu a book for submission. He observed quietly. It didn't look like she was being bullied at all. He continued watching as she approached other students, music firmly instructing them to hand in their books immediately. One of the students groaned, realizing she was on duty that week, and reluctantly complied. Wong scoffed softly. If anything, she seemed to be the one bullying others. As Janu turned and walked away, the students began whispering among themselves, commenting that it was troublesome to get on her bad side because she music never let anything slide. Some even said she was scarier than the teacher. Wong nodded along, fully agreeing. She really was difficult to deal with. As she exited the classroom, Wong watched her leave before lowering his gaze to his notebook. There it was, written clearly. Yona's weakness was having no friends. He closed the book and held it tightly. Then, after a moment, scratched his head. What was he even doing? He muttered to himself with a sigh before walking away. In the teacher's office, Yonu handed over the collected books. The teacher praised her diligence and she responded quietly. Her arm felt sore, prompting her to stretch it slightly. Instinctively, she glanced at her watch to check the time before heading straight to the library. Standing in front of the clerk's desk with her face scrunched, music in frustration, she asked about a book titled Discourse on Inequality. The clerk informed her that another student had already borrowed it, adding that Jonu always seemed to be one step behind. With a faintly disappointed expression, Yonu thanked the clerk, wished her a good day, and selected another book before walking away. Between the shelves nearby, a student stood still with a book covering their face. The book was Discourse on Inequality, the very one Yensu had been searching for. When the student lowered it, a deep smirk appeared on their face. It was Wong. At last, he believed he had truly found Yensu's weakness. Jonu began to reflect on herself. Her name was Yonu Guk, and she had never cared about the nonsense surrounding gold spoons, or dirt spoons, or debates about being rich, music, or poor. All she knew was that ever since she had been able to hold a spoon and eat her grandmother's food, she had never music lost to anyone. That belief remained unshaken until she met Wong Choi. During her first year, on a particular day, when she was in the library borrowing books, the librarian casually commented that she was borrowing a large number of books once again. Yonu responded calmly that she was actually reading less than usual since it was exam season. The librarian smiled and remarked that she was truly something else. Yensu's music gaze then shifted to the side where a list was pasted on the wall titled Reading Whiners of May. She stepped closer and examined it carefully. At the top of the list was the name Wong Choi, while her own name appeared in second place. Her expression stiffened. She immediately turned back to the librarian and asked who Wong Choi was. The librarian appeared surprised that Yonu didn't know and pointed toward a section of the library. Yonu followed the direction and spotted a boy seated quietly, his attention fixed on a book in front of him. As he flipped through the pages, she approached him directly and asked about his rank in school. Wong, looking dazed, replied that he was ranked 267th. Yensu's eyes widened as she asked how many students attended the school. He answered calmly that there were 267 students in total. For a moment, Yonu didn't know what to say. From that day on, her first impression of Wong was that he seemed foolish. Even afterward, when she saw him sleeping carelessly in class or being punished by teachers, she continued to see him as nothing more than a fool. Someone like Wong, she believed, could never be considered her rival. That perception remained unchanged until the day her teacher informed her about the documentary. He explained that a friend of his worked as a producer at a TV station and wanted to film a documentary about the school lives of the students ranked first and last. Even when she received the offer to participate, Wong never crossed her mind. She had simply stared at the proposal and asked whether she would be paid. Her only concern at the time was that her grandmother wouldn't have to work for a few days if she earned money from it. After filming began, the most she felt toward Wong was mild sympathy. Nothing more. She had no idea, none at all. In the present, while searching through the library shelves, Yensu noticed something odd. She checked the music, the system, and quickly discovered an inconsistency. She approached the librarian and pointed out that the database showed several philosophy-related books as available, yet they were nowhere to be found on the shelves. The librarian, taken aback, replied that the system showed no errors and suggested that someone might already be reading them. Yensu lowered her gaze, thinking carefully. Who would possibly read all of those difficult books at once? Suddenly, her eyes snapped open. She hoped it wasn't the person she was thinking of. Without hesitation, she walked toward the same area of the library she had visited the previous year. There, she found the missing books piled up neatly. Standing with her arms folded, she looked down at Wong, who had a pencil held loosely in his mouth as he read. She asked whether he intended to read all of those books at once. Without looking up, Wong replied that he might, adding that he had some research to do as well. Her irritation flared instantly. She snapped that he couldn't monopolize so many books when others might need them, and demanded to know why he wanted to read them in the first place. Wong finally looked up at her and broke into a wide grin, telling her that if she asked nicely, he might consider answering. Her eyes burned with anger as she asked what he had just said, referring to him as a punk. What she didn't realize was that if the person challenging her had truly been a fool, the blow to her pride would have been far greater. She stormed out of the library, her steps heavy, and grabbed a cup of water, gulping it down in one go. Her fingers tightened around the cup as her anger lingered, startling students who passed by and caught sight of her expression. She had let her guard down because of his harmless-looking face. After a moment, she released a slow breath, forcing herself to calm down. There was no need to rush. Once lunchtime ended, he would have to return the books. And when that happened, she would borrow them herself. Yensu returned to the library, her steps quick and determined. Moments later, the bell rang, announcing the end of lunch break. Her shoulders stiffened as realization hit her all at once. This was her chance. Suppressing her irritation, she hurried toward Wong, who was still there. He looked up at her calmly and remarked that he had been right all along. She should have simply said that she wanted the book. She immediately rejected that idea, brushing it off with a sharp huff. Without another word, Wong gathered the stack of books into his arms and began walking away, muttering under his breath about whatever she had just said. Yonu stood still, watching his back as he left, her gaze dim and unsettled. Snapping herself out of it, she cursed him silently for wasting her time, and rushed to grab another book instead. She quickly approached the librarian and said she wanted to borrow it, but the librarian firmly told her to return to class since the bell had already rung. Panic crept into Yensu's expression as she insisted that it would only take a minute. At that moment, Wong passed by and quietly shushed her, prompting her to glare sharply in his direction. With a satisfied smirk and a pencil resting loosely between his lips, Wong pointed upward. Yensu followed his gesture, and saw the sign posted above them. Quiet indoors. She froze, her face paling as the meaning sank in. There was no denying it. This round was clearly her loss. Tightening her grip on her book, she turned and rushed back to class. She had wasted too much time focusing on Wong's slow movements and worse, his infuriatingly arrogant attitude. Later that day, during the interview session, Wong explained that all he wanted was to live peacefully, as he always had, occasionally helping his parents at their restaurants. He added that he genuinely did not understand why attending a university was considered so important. Yonu immediately countered his statement, asserting that adults needed to become independent from their parents, and learn how to stand on their own. Casting a sharp glance in Wong's direction, she made it clear that she despised people who inconvenienced others. Wong responded casually, remarking that he despised people who were careless with their words. Yensu turned to him at once, her posture straightening as anger flared in her eyes, demanding to know if his comment had been directed at her. He simply replied that he was saying what he thought, then slowly added a subjective remark with a deep smirk. Without waiting for response, he stood up, stretched slightly, and announced that he was going to the bathroom, yawning as he walked away. Yonu remained seated, staring after him as surprise flickered across her face. The director, music smiling awkwardly, commented that Wong had become much more talkative since he started spending time with her. However, before he could continue, music, he noticed the sudden shift in Yensu's expression. The air around her felt tense, music, charged with restrained anger. The director stiffened, a shrill sound escaping him, as he realized things were taking a dangerous turn. Later, Yonu leaned against an open window, gripping the frame as she took steady breaths to calm herself. She reminded herself, music, that reacting would only mean letting him win. Just then, a voice spoke from behind her, suggesting that she give up on the book-borrowing battle altogether. Turning around, she saw Ji Wong standing there. He explained that Wong had always been obsessed music, with just two things since childhood, books and drawing. By now, he said, Wong likely had the entire library memorized. Yang Su's expression shifted slightly, music at that, and Ji Wong stepped closer, elaborating that Wong always drew the same thing over and over again. He laughed softly, adding that Wong hated being told that. A faint smirk appeared on Yang Su's face as she stared ahead, clearly taking note of the information. Jeong, noticing that she had gone quiet again, began to turn away. Before he could leave, however, Yonu called out to him. Then, unexpectedly, she asked him to tell her more. The next day, rain poured down heavily. Wong's mother stood by the doorway, sighing as she watched the sheets of rainfall. Just then, Wong passed by her, casually, announcing that he was heading out. She immediately stopped him, telling him that she would ask his father to give him a ride since the rain was so heavy. Wong reassured her that it was fine, explaining that it didn't take long to get to school anyway. He opened his umbrella, waved goodbye, and told her he would see her later, smiling brightly. As he stepped outside, his mother called after him, warning him not to run so he wouldn't slip and fall. He turned back briefly, smiling again and telling her not to worry, but she continued watching him with concern as he walked away. On the way to school, Wong looked ahead and let out a small sigh when he spotted a familiar figure. It was Ji Wong. He hurried over and called out loudly, startling Ji Wong so badly that he nearly jumped. Noticing his reaction, Wong asked why he looked so surprised, then went on to ask why Jeong hadn't come over for breakfast and whether he had overslept. Jeong muttered a quiet confirmation, and Wong cheerfully told him that sleeping in was perfectly normal. As they continued walking, Wong casually draped an arm over Jeong's shoulder. A short distance behind them, Yonu followed at a slower pace, watching the two of them in silence. Once in class, Wong unpacked his bag and began searching through his books. After rummaging for a while, he realized that he had left his pen cutter at home. The realization unsettled him. Moments later, a pen cutter slid across the desk toward him. A voice informed him that he could use it. When he looked up, he saw that it was Yonu. Wong flinched instinctively, startled and uneasy at the same time. He thanked her nervously, but inside his thoughts were in turmoil. He couldn't understand what had changed or why she was suddenly acting kind. Glancing at her again, unease settled deep in his chest. He had a bad feeling about it. As the teacher continued writing on the board, Wong shifted his focus back and forth between the lesson and his drawing. Despite the rain, he felt strangely optimistic. His drawing was coming together unusually well, and it had been a long time since he had been able to finish one. He thought that maybe, just maybe, today would be the day. Then the desk began to tremble. At first, it was faint, but the shaking continued at a steady rhythm. Sweat formed on his brow as he wondered if it was an earthquake. Bending down slightly, he looked beneath the desk and saw Yona's foot tapping against it. His mind flashed back to the previous day when Yonu had asked Jeong to tell her more about Wong. Jeong hesitated, asking what she meant. Yonu had explained calmly that since she would be spending the next month with Wong, she simply wanted to know what she should be careful about. She blinked softly while saying it. Ji Wong, flustered, had scratched the back of his neck and replied that there wasn't really anything she needed to worry about. Yang Su had reassured him that even trivial things were fine and blinked again, even more gently. After thinking for a moment, Jeong had finally mentioned that Wong became extremely sensitive whenever his drawing was going well. That information had been exactly what Yen Su needed. Back in the present, she shook the desk more enthusiastically, clearly energized. She had asked what she should be careful about, but she had never said she would actually be careful. Wong stared at her in disbelief. After a moment, he quietly told her that the desk was shaking. Yen Su reacted with exaggerated surprise, claiming that she hadn't noticed at all. At that point, her shamelessness was impossible to ignore. Wong turned back to his drawing, forcing himself to calm down. He reminded himself that today wasn't the day to pick a fight. Yeonu glanced sideways at him, recalling another detail Jeong had shared. That Wong became especially sensitive on rainy days. Slowly, she began clicking her pen repeatedly. The sound grated on his nerves. He tried to ignore it, but his focus shattered. Irritation built quickly, and he finally turned toward her, asking her to stop. Yeonu apologized softly, twirling the pen between her fingers. Wong sighed and turned back to his music drawing. Then another sound echoed against the desk. Tracing the source of the sound, Wong realized that Yeonu was using her pen to draw directly on the desk. By that point, his patience had worn dangerously thin. Unable to endure it any longer, he abruptly stood up and left the classroom without asking for permission. The teacher, momentarily caught off guard, turned to Yeonu and asked what had happened to Wong. Yeonu responded that she didn't know, gesturing innocently as she spoke. Ji Wong quickly followed after Wong. He caught up to him on the staircase, music, where Wong was already shouting in frustration, scratching his head repeatedly, as if trying to shake off his irritation. Wong protested loudly, insisting that Yeonu had been doing it on purpose. Ji Wong, clearly surprised, asked what he meant. Wong explained that she had kept disturbing him while he was drawing, adding that she had suddenly started shaking her legs out of nowhere. He muttered that he should have known something was wrong the moment she let him borrow her pen cutter. In his mind, there was no way Yeonu would ever be genuinely nice to him. As he thought about it more deeply, another unsettling question surfaced. How had she known that he drew especially well on rainy days? Jeong's expression immediately darkened. He was just about to admit that he had told her when Wong suddenly turned toward him and half-jokingly claimed that Yeonu must have supernatural powers. Ji Wong swallowed the truth, his face stiff. Back in the classroom, Yeonu stretched comfortably in her seat, clearly pleased. It had been a long time since she had felt music this relaxed. She glanced toward Wong's desk and thought to herself that he always acted as though he was creating some grand masterpiece. Leaning slightly closer to observe, she let out a quiet sigh. As usual, he was drawing the same things, trees and buildings. Still, she admitted internally that it didn't look half bad. The director soon approached her, music, his eyes settling on the drawing as well. He quietly remarked that it was well done. Yen Su asked if he truly meant it, and the director responded enthusiastically, saying that it would be good to film it. Yeonsu immediately turned toward him and firmly stated that filming without Wong's permission wouldn't be appropriate. The director froze in surprise, then scratched the back of his head with a sheepish smile, admitting that she was right. He apologized, explaining that he had been too focused on gathering footage for the documentary. Growing overly animated, the director then commented that Yeonu was clearly looking out for Wong. Without lifting her gaze from her book, she casually dismissed the idea. Realizing he had misunderstood, the director apologized once more and quietly walked away. Later in class, Yensu glanced in Wong's direction again. As expected, he was completely absorbed in his drawing. She found music bit strangely irritating, thinking that someone like him should be directing that level of focus toward his studies instead. Watching him continue, she briefly wondered if he had begun preparing a portfolio to enter a fine arts university. Then she remembered. He had already said he wasn't going to university at all. Without realizing it, she kept staring. When Wong suddenly glanced sideways and caught her looking, she quickly turned away, pretending to concentrate on her book. After the teacher finished the lesson and left the classroom, the students burst into chatter. Yensu, however, felt anything but relieved. She couldn't believe she had missed the first 30 minutes of the lesson. Worse still, she had wasted that time paying attention to his pointless drawing. Standing up to go speak with the teacher, she accidentally shook the desk hard. Realizing what she had done, she turned quickly to apologize, but Wong didn't even look at her. His eyes remained fixed on the page. Leaning closer, Yeonu noticed the damage. Because of her, he had already made a mistake in the drawing. As the students excitedly filmed the double rainbow outside, marveling that they had never seen one before, one of them turned back and asked the director whether he wasn't going to record it as well. The director, visibly tense, replied that it wasn't the time to be filming a rainbow. His attention remained fixed on Wong and Yeonu. The atmosphere in the classroom had grown heavy and serious. Wong clenched his fist tightly at his side while Yeonu stood still, her gaze locked on him. When Yeonu began to apologize, explaining that it had been a mistake, Wong abruptly slammed his sketchbook shut. He apologized to the director for this, then stated that he was done filming for the day. Without waiting, he stood up and walked out of the classroom. The director hurried after him, calling for him to wait, while Ji-Won quickly told the director that he would check on Wong instead. Left behind, Yeonu sank into her seat, her thoughts spinning wildly. She realized how careless she had been and couldn't believe she had caused such a mistake. She had only meant to annoy him slightly, nothing more. Glancing sideways at Wong's drawing book, she scanned the room cautiously. When she confirmed that no one was paying attention, she stood up quickly, rushed to his desk, and opened the sketchbook. Carefully, she applied correction fluid to the damaged area. Once she was finished, she paused and looked at it closely, a small smile forming when she saw that it looked almost as good as new. Later, when the teacher entered the classroom, he immediately announced that class was starting. His gaze shifted to the back where an empty seat caught his attention, and he asked who normally sat there. At that moment, Wong was just stepping into the classroom. He apologized quietly, his expression lowered. The teacher scolded him sharply, telling him to sit down and not disrupt the class atmosphere. Wong obeyed and took his seat slowly. As the lesson resumed, Wong reached for his drawing book. Yensu glanced at him briefly from the side, but quickly turned forward again. Without a word, Wong slipped the book back into his bag and lifted his gaze to the front, his face unreadable. The tension in the air was thick enough that Yeonu swallowed nervously, a thin layer of sweat forming along her temples. When the class ended, the students thanked the teacher. Wong immediately stood up and turned to leave. Yeonu called out to him, but he didn't respond. He walked straight out of the classroom without looking back. Yensu remained where she was, watching him go, unsure of what she should do next. Outside, the sun shone brightly. Wong sat down on a bench directly under the heat, the sunlight bearing down on him relentlessly. Ji-Won soon joined him and handed him a can of drink. He asked why Wong was sitting in the sun, reminding him